Hello and welcome to the second episode in this little series that I've got running. So today we're looking at rifle scopes and we're picking our way through the myriad of options so that we get the right option or set of options and functions of a scope for the rifle that we bought in episode 1. There are a multitude of options for scopes, different diameters, different lengths, different adjustable objectives, different reticles, even different increments in turret adjustments. But how do we, make sense of all of this so that we get the right one? Because again, gunsmith's just going to be hoying stuff on the table in front of you. So let's start with parallax and how we can adjust for that on our rifle scopes. So you have various types of parallax adjustment or adjustable objective, as it'll be on the box that the class is AO. You've got this type here which has absolutely nothing, it's just fixed. You have this one which is a front-ended collar on the objective bell, which is this section here, this being the eye bell. And then you have side wheel where you would adjust it on the back here. So what does this device do, or this option do? Well, parallax works in a function. So what you ultimately have is you have your eye where you're looking, you have your crosshair, which is this hand, and then we'll have our target, which is right there. And when we move our eye, what we see is our target floating, or it'll be the other way, won't it, around in our crosshair. I.e., when we move our head, if we get our cheek well wrong between shots, say like on a spring rifle, it can be quite common because you've always got to take your head out the stock before you take your next shot. What can happen is you'll put your cheek in a slightly different place and your objective could quite simply have lifted up or dropped down depending on which way it works. So what it actually does, parallax adjustment, is it takes a crosshair and it brings it forward and lays it in the same sort of plane or distance as what the target is. So when you look at it and move your head, your crosshair will never float on your target. It's quite important because it can cause a massive problem. So be careful of that when you get a fixed scope. You can adjust a fixed scope. I wouldn't recommend you do it. When you unscrew this very, very fine thread, you end up with two little holes. You probably can't see that from there. And you just get a flat object and you just rotate it and just keep checking it off an object. Just wiggle your head in the scope until it becomes a point where it's absolutely fixed. That's your zero. But let's face it, it's not the best way to do it. These are the cheapest options available, so you might not be able to afford having an adjustable objective option, but certainly if you can get it, worth having, because it'll save you a lot of pain in the long run. You can also use adjustable objective for range finding, as I do on this one. We'll discuss that in another episode. So they're the three options. Side wheel being the most expensive, collar being pretty much the industry standard, and these just being at the bottom end of all the manufacturers' scales. There's nothing wrong as long as you can make sure you get your head in the same place every time. Parallax shouldn't be a problem. However, it can cause massive problems, as I've found out on a previous Hawk scope. The next thing that we need to consider is our magnification. So as you can see on this one and on this Walther one here, there's no actual adjustment for power. This is just an eye relief on this, which is focus and sharpening the crosshair and the target. There's no adjustable power. There is on this one, on the AGS, and this power works from between 6 to 24. The Walther one's fixed at 6 magnification, which means that basically at 60 yards it's going to look like it's at 10 yards. And then this one is a 4 times fixed magnification. So say a 400 yard target is going to look like it's at 100 with that one. More magnification ultimately means more wobble. It does bring you closer to your target, but it really, really wobbles. The other thing you might find is that once you get up to the top end of your magnification, your eye bell can't capture enough light and it becomes a bit cloudy and a bit dazed. I use high magnifications purely for range finding, so I'll just whack it up to 24, twiddle this knob until the side wheel, until the target and the crosshair are as sharp as they can be I'll bring it back down to 10. I can read off, you know, the side wheel for my range. It's a very rough guide. Rangefinders I find a bit more awkward. So 6 magnifications more than enough for going out in the field and working out to 40 yards with. I used this one for 3 or 4 months before I started getting involved with this pre-charged one, purely to increase the amount of quarry I had, but it was still more tthan enough. It's got 42mm objective bell, this one's got 50 and this one's got 32, and it'll read off on the scope somewhere. You'll have a number 4x on this one, 32, which means 4 times magnification by a 32mm objective bell. For example, this is a 6x42, so 6 times magnification by 42mm objective bell, and this is a powered one, so what you have is the range. So you have 6-24 to x, sorry, so it'll go from 6 to 24 mag on a 50mm objective bell. Now, a bigger objective bell just captures more light and lets more light in. So as the night draws on, these ones, this one will switch off first, ultimately it'll cease working first, then this one, and then this one, because this one can't capture, needs more light for it to work. This one increasingly more, and then, or increasingly less, and this one increasingly less from that one. But past a certain point, you'll be on a lamp, which is what this attachment's for. Now there's generally 2 sizes of tube to look at, 25 and 30mm. There's nothing really a problem in that. Generally what I tend to find, if it's got a side wheel, it's going to be 30. If it hasn't, it's going to be 25. There's nothing wrong with either of them. It doesn't really make that big a deal. It's not that big a deal. It's not that big a difference to anything. The other thing to consider is how your turrets are delivered to you. So these ones are exposed. They have a little locking collar on the bottom to stop you messing about with them or knocking them in the field. But these are, you know, sort of increments. So you can use these, for example, I have 2 reticle maps for this one. And what I'll do is, if I say I have 0 to 80 yard shot, I can work quite happily off the current setting. If I want to go from 80 to 120 yards, say for target shooting on field target range, I can unlock it. I've got a set of numbers on here. I can just rotate them down 4 full rotations, lock it back off again, and then I know that my next map starts at 90 yards, no 100 yards. That's re-zeros the rifle ultimately, and then I can start. I've got another reticle map for that, but it's a very short reticle map. You know, it's basically ideal. If you do knock it, then you can reset it. You know exactly where you are, especially if they're resettable notches, where you can take this cap off and rotate it back to 0 once you twiddle with it. You know. These ones are hidden underneath, and it's the same on the scope in front of this rifle. These work off you stick a coin in there or a screwdriver. I generally use a coin. You can get your thumb on there and give it a good rake, but you know, you've got to be fairly, you know, soft fingers in order for it to take shape or have good pressure on there. But generally just a 5p piece in there, and you can just turn it left or right. These are a bit more awkward to set up than what this one is, generally because there's less to grip on. You've got extra bits in there working against you. But once they're set, you know, these caps stop them being set, you know. As for the increments of adjustment on the turrets, that's, you know, just whatever comes with it, to be honest with you. It makes no odds. Ultimately you're just going to twist it until your crosshair is on your target, your point of impact, and then you're just going to work it from there. Obviously these ones you have the option to reset it, whereas these ones, you know, bring it back to 0, so you know that everything's, if you adjust it, you can bring it back again, you know just for windage or elevation or something. These ones are a bit more cumbersome. Once they're set, really, they're just set, you know, it's down to a bit of Kentucky windage to work off. Final thing, really, no, it's not the final thing, but one of the last things to look at is illuminated reticles. Now, I'm not really that fussed about these. Yes, they've come in handy once or twice, but they're the exception. You know, out of maybe 65 rabbits that I've shot this year, I've used that 2 or 3 times. I don't even know what percentage that works out at, probably not that high. They generally never work anyway because I always leave them switched on. This one's been left switched on for about 2 weeks. The Remington for about a month. They hardly work now. So I've got to keep changing the batteries in them. You know, the problem is they come in red and then another colour generally. If they come in red and you use a red lamp, you can't see the crosshair when you put the lamp on. It just disappears. So you end up leaving it off anyway. But then if you want to have a shot at a silhouetted target, you know, say you've got a rabbit standing up on the horizon and you can see its outline perfectly, you know exactly where your brain is. You take your shot. I wouldn't even use, you know, you might use it on say level 1 just to define your crosshair, but again them shots, they're few and far between. So it's not the be all and end all. You know, in low light situations when it's getting a bit dark, you might, you know, flick it on, but it's not a necessity, it's more of a luxury. It'll come with an option, you know, for your budget. You know, a bit of a delighter really more than anything. The final thing to consider is the actual reticle itself. I'm having a bit of a think here, but yeah, the reticle itself, you've got, I class them into 3 types again, just to keep it simple. Duplex, which is quite simply enemy at the gate, sniper, you know, crosshair. You've got mil-dot, which is the same again, however it's just got a set of dots or half dots in there as well, so you might have a dot then a dash and a dot then a dash to give you a half mil-dot increment, which I find are pretty much the best, to be honest with you. Other people will argue, but as you'll see later on, a half mil-dot scope is much more valuable than what a duplex one is. Then you've got specialised scopes or reticles after that, which are things like 6As and SRs and Air Max or whatever they call them now. There's all different kinds of reticles, but they're ultimately just a little twist on, you know, the mil-dot system. The way I would say it is like this: get yourself a reticle that has increments down the elevation, because for air rifles your trajectory is so looping because the pellet's firing so slow that each of them increments is used to be assigned a range later on. So if you've got a target 36 yards, you might say, okay, that's bang on the crosshair in the middle, bang. Oh, it's now got one at 27 yards. Oh, well, that's just half a mil-dot under, you know, or the next bar under. And that's the beauty of a mil-dot. Now, I know mil-dots were developed in the Vietnam War for snipers to estimate range of a target. They don't really work on air rifles because the ranges are so close. Some people might disagree with that, but in all honesty, there's better ways of range finding than using a mil-dot system with an air rifle. Mainly being, you know, the AO collar is much more accurate, especially once you've had to play with it and you've put a line of tape over the top and then reassigned all these numbers to, you know, your actual tape. The final thing, just to cover, is how the power affects the reticle. Now there's 2 types of scope in that plane, and you see what I'm saying about myriad of options. There's first focal plane and second focal plane. Now if you've got a mil-dot scope and you have a second focal plane, when you adjust the power of the scope, what will happen is the scope will shrink, the actual reticle itself will shrink against the size of the target. If you've got first focal plane, it'll stay the same size. You need to make sure that if you do have a powered scope, when you map your reticle, that you keep the magnification set, which kind of then makes you think, well, what's the point of having variable power? Well, I'll discuss that later on when we go into a range finding episode, but remember, when you take your shot, wherever you set your reticle to, you'll need to keep it the same power, or your reticle map will be out to your actual cheat sheet. I think that pretty much covers everything. We'll quickly have a look at scope mounts now. Scope mounts has various types. If you've got a spring rifle, make sure that you get a scope mount that works, doesn't shock your scope out of 0. I've had it quite a bit on various spring rifles where you fire it and it just instantly knocks the scope off at 0. Some scopes prefer a 2-piece mount, some scopes prefer a 1-piece mount. I've had a Webley Vulcan which preferred to have 2-piece mounts and an arrestor block behind it. This one seems to like one-piece mounts, and it just goes down to, you know, how you do it. So one-piece mount generally has more clamping load and stops it moving. I had a Webley Vulcan which completely rubbished that theory. What it did do on the Webley Vulcan was resonate all that shock from that one-piece mount into the scope and shift it to 0. Put it back on a two-piece mount. This bar here wasn't there, so that, you know, the scope wasn't taking as much shock. It was like an anti-vibration by using the two scope mounts there. You know, make sure you've got an arrestor pin in your scope mount so that you can fix it onto the rifle. You usually have a set of holes or Picatinny rails or whatever. There's always usually something to anchor your scope mount off, your rear scope mount. Make sure you get one of them, because if not, you may find on a spring rifle your scope progressively comes back as it sort of sits still. The rifle shuts forward and then, you know, comes back again. It'll always have that little jolt, if you know what I mean, and want to come backwards. On pre-charged, you can pretty much go with anything that takes your fancy. I generally work off two-piece mounts on this one, on the Walther. I've got the Rotex, that's got a one-piece mount on purely because it just looked better, you know, function-wise. The other reason for using the one-piece mount on it was to give myself enough clearance from the barrel. Scope mounts make a big difference in barrel adjustment, but I'm planning on doing a second series where I'll come into scope height and all the rest of it later, and how you can use that to sort of flatten out or lumpy your trajectory a little bit. But yeah, always make sure when you do get a scope mount, or the scope mounts that come with your scope, have enough clearance. It's quite common for the barrel to, or the ocular end to foul your barrel and damage your bluing. Best way to check that, just when you put your scope together loosely, you know, or just rest the bottom half of your scope mounts on the table, and then drop your scope on there and see how it sits. It's very, very rarely that your action is going to be below your barrel, unless you've got a spring rifle with a breech block like this. That's about it really. Just make sure that it does actually fit on the rifle. If you can take your rifle, or they've got one in stock that they can just quickly try it on, just to make sure that if you've got open sights, like on my Remington, I can't fit this scope on the Remington, or couldn't because it had open sights. They had to be removed to get the AGS on there. And that's about it. So, you know, I don't think you need to spend more than 150 quid on a rifle scope. You know, these are around about the £90 to £120 mark now. You can even pick them up. I've had one of these. In fact, this one, in fact, costs less than £90. I mean, it's a fantastic scope. It does everything I want. Yes, it's at the cheaper end. Yes, the picture might not be as sharp as what it might be on, say, Swarovski, but, you know, Swarovskis are a lot of money. You know, Zeiss, they're a lot of money as well. These do the job just as well, you know. Yeah, I don't need to look at my target, I just need to know where my crosshair is, and can I make out where its brain's going to be easily. Yes, it'll do. You know, don't get too wound up in it. Hopefully that covers all the options that you can get on a scope, or the important options enough. As always, feel free to comment, don't troll, and I'll see you in the next episode. Thanks for watching. Bye.